Hello, welcome to yesterday's Airlines. Once again, there are new release announcements to review, and it is NG Models who've kicked out a monster list for February. I was a little surprised, I have to be honest, that there is even a February list from NG, considering the Chinese New Year and all. But there is, and it's huge. There are, to my count, 33 models on the list. I've written about this on the forums that I personally don't see a problem with NG releasing this many models. That is as long as they can afford it. I am a little concerned that they're releasing so many models and the cost must be very high. I really don't want them to overstretch themselves and get into trouble. But it's not under my control what they do, so I guess all I can do is comment on the models that they are announcing. I seriously doubt they'll all appear in February anyway. I imagine quite a few will be delayed into March. And I guess also, when you look at the list, there's still a reasonable number of models here which are variants of each other or of models that have been made in previous months, which must lower the costs somewhat. Even so, 33 models is a huge number, and it's going to make this video quite difficult to do because I don't want it to be enormously long. So I'm going to be reasonably quick, or I'm going to try to be reasonably quick in my analysis, and let's see how we go getting through this big list of releases. It is an interesting month. There is some really nice stuff in here, especially for people who collect modern airliners that haven't been made before. So I think that there's some really quality models that are likely to come out of this list. So let's get into that in a second. But obviously, before you do, subscribe to the channel, like the video, check me out at Yesterday Airlines on Instagram, and obviously at yesterdaysairlines.com. I've been trying to do a bit more varied material recently. I've been doing some snapshot videos, as hopefully you've seen on the YouTube channel here. There'll be more of those coming, but there's also still plenty of long form content, reviews and ratings and histories and all that good stuff that's coming on the website. So keep an eye out across the different platforms that I use, and let's get into this month's NG Models releases. Okay, so first up, I'm actually going to look at a Boeing 747 SP, which is completely out of order, but never mind. Yeah, there haven't been many SPs recently at all. I've been moaning about that, so it's good to see the return of the mold. Obviously, there's just one because you can't possibly release multiple at the same time. And I have to say, this choice of Corsair, the French charter airline, and the aircraft is registered FGTOM. I think it was the only French registered SP that ever existed. It's a slightly unusual choice, I have to say. There are lots of, you'd have thought, far more sale-worthy SPs out there to make, so I'm a little surprised they're making this one. It has been made before by Gemini back all the way in 1999, so on the old mold it had lots of seams, you know, simple undercarriage and all that stuff. So in that sense, you know, the model does need to be remade, but at the same time, you perhaps can question the choice when there's so many other SPs to be made. But I guess, you know, the others will turn up eventually. So for me, I think, you know, it's a model that I probably will get. I think I can just about fit it into my French shelf of the fleet there. But it's not quite hitting the supersonic. It's not really a first line SP that I want to get. It's not in my top 10 remaining 747 SPs. I'm sure it'll be nice, but I'm going to put this one into high flyer. Okay, after that brief foray into the Boeings for no apparent reason, we're going to stay here, or move to the Airbuses as these reviews usually start. And this month there is a surprising number of Airbus. Well, maybe it's not surprising. This is probably just the future, isn't it? There's a large number of Airbus A321s this month, though quite a few of them are kind of variants of each other. So let's get through those. The first up, we've got another Air New Zealand. This is the third Air New Zealand A321, probably in as many months. This one is the first aircraft wearing the full all-black scheme. They've previously made the newer Star Alliance all-black scheme, and they've made the, last month I think, the standard white and black version of the livery. This model has been made previously by Panda Models, and that release was really, really nice. And if you've got it, there's absolutely no reason to replace it with the NG Models version. It was also made by jcwings, and that mold is rubbish, so there's plenty of reason to replace that one. Having said that, and it's been made by Phoenix as well, and their mold is pretty poor too. So it's been made 3 times before. Does it need a 4th release? Well, I guess only one of the previous 3 is any good. So maybe it certainly fits well with the previous 2 releases, and I could have told you this model was going to come out just by the fact they've made the previous 2. I've got a bit of an affinity for engine, obviously having lived there recently, but I do have the Panda version, so I'm not going to be getting this version. I was a little unclear. I'm not entirely certain where to put this model. Is it just workhorse or is it better than that? I'm going to put it into high flyer. I'm going to be, generous for this one at least, but I am going to try and be a bit harder on some of these models than I have been previously, like I was in the last Phoenix video, and perhaps being too nice to the manufacturers. So maybe I need to stop that. Okay, next up, we've got another couple of A321 Neos, and these ones are in the colours of Air Busan from South Korea. I have to say that South Korean airlines have got the most tedious, boring names. They're all named after just cities. So you've got Air Seoul, Air Incheon, Air Busan, and so on, which shows a real lack of, I don't know, just a lack of nous, really. And they're also all owned by Asiana or Korean, so there's going to be some consolidation in that market space now that those 2 airlines are merging as well. Looking at the history of Air Busan in 400 scale, there have been a surprising number of models, almost all of them made by Phoenix. There have been some A320s, there have been 3 A321s by Phoenix. There have been a couple of A321 Neos also made by jcwings. Obviously, as I said just a minute ago, the Phoenix A321 isn't an A321 really, and the jcwings one has got this gigantic Neo engine. So these models will no doubt be vastly superior, and the first good Air Busan A321s that have been made in the scale. The livery is actually surprisingly attractive. So even though I'm not overly excited by it, and it's certainly not a model I'm going to get, these 2 Air Busan A321s will no doubt be good. Incidentally, the difference between them is that one of them has an Expo scheme and the other one is in the standard colours. I'm going to put the standard colours one up into high flyer. Yeah, and the Expo one I'm less excited, but I'm going to put that one down into workhorse. Who needs 2 Air Busans in their fleet? Nobody, unless you're from South Korea, that is probably. Next up, we've got another pair of A321s from a carrier which NG likes quite a lot, and that's JetBlue. And they've already made 4 previous JetBlue A321s. These 2 are both Neos. They're wearing the streamers scheme and the ribbons scheme tails. They're both really nice liveries. But they're not unique in 400. There have been 13, or including these 2, there have been 13 JetBlue A321s made. And Panda, again, have already been here with both of these schemes. So Panda models have made a streamers liveried aircraft. In fact, it's exactly the same rego as the one which NG are making here, and it was only made in 2021. And also, Panda have made an aircraft wearing the ribbons scheme, though that one was marketed as Winglux models. It was still widely available, and it's basically Panda. There's no reason to be replacing those if you've got them already. They were out quite recently. They're going to be as good, or maybe slightly better than the NG versions, at least as good. So there's no dramatic reason to buy these NGs unless you didn't get the previous Panda releases. I have to say, just that Gemini have also made a model wearing the streamers scheme as well. Obviously, that's got giant engines. It's not as good, but yeah, is what it is. Yeah, these aren't exciting me as much as they would if Panda hadn't already made them. There's no real reason for NG to remake them, in my opinion. I'm going to put these both into workhorse. Next up, we go to Canada, and there's a pair of Air Transat A321s. One is an A321 Neo, CGOIO, and the second is a CEO, CGEZJ. And the CEO is wearing a Kids Club scheme, which is quite funky. It's got a star on the tail, it's got like eyes and a mouth, I think. And this looks like probably a mouth around the actual cockpit of the aircraft. Not the cockpit, the nose cone, sorry. Yeah, these look quite nice. Looking back through what's been made, The Neo, at least, has been made previously both by jcwings and Aero Classics, not too long ago, but not really recently either. I think that the it was, what year was it? It was 2019 that jcwings made, or at least that they announced anyway, their version, and it was 2020 that Aero Classics made theirs. These will undoubtedly be better than both of those older releases, and so in that respect, I think that they will be pretty good models and highly sought after. In fact, yeah, I'm tempted here. I am tempted to put this Air Transat Neo into the supersonic category. I think that it will be substantially better than the earlier releases. This isn't a case of, well, Panda's made one, it's going to be as good. This is a case of that it's been made on relatively weak jcwings mold. And the Aero Classics mold, though good, you know, it doesn't have aerials, it's simple landing gear. So I think that Neo version is going to be supersonic. Okay, we've got a couple more A321s to go. The next one is Royal Air Force. It's GBNI is the reg. And even though the registration is different, the livery is, as far as I can tell, exactly the same as the previous models, which were registered GXATW, that were made both by Gemini, once again, big engines, and Panda again. So these are, I think, the fourth of the A321s this month by NG that have been made previously by Panda models. I know there's absolutely no love lost between those two brands, incidentally, so it's not a case of them collaborating in any way. It's a case of really competing. But pointless competition, NG. You don't need to make this model when it's already been made by Panda, and it's just as good, in my opinion. So, yeah, this one's just going to go in the workhorse. It's not exciting. It's not particularly interesting, in my opinion. And I would have thought that most people have one of the previous two releases. Who would want one? They weren't that old. The Panda one was released in 2021. So it's not an old release, and so was the Gemini. So it's only the last of the A321s, which is really completely new, I would say, unless I guess you count the Air Transat CEO. And this is Aegean Airlines. It's an A321 Neo again, SX NAG in Aegean's current scheme. And it is the first release of an Aegean Airlines aircraft wearing this livery. There has only ever been one previous Aegean Airlines release, and that was a Phoenix A321 CEO in the old, much whiter and not as nice scheme. This new scheme is quite pleasant, though it's also, I guess, theoretically, I mean, it could be any from any country. There's nothing particularly Greek about it, I would say, and the logo doesn't really scream G and C to me, but it's not an unattractive livery, even though it is, you know, indistinct. The fact, however, that it's never been made before in 400 scale, and that I think it will be quite popular for a relatively important airline in that region, really does elevate this release, and I think this one does deserve to get up there into supersonic. So I think this will be a very nice and worthy release. Okay, that gets us through all the A321s, but we've still got plenty more Airbus family aircraft to look at. We've got one A320 this month, and this model is in the colours of, well, it's in the colours of Avianca, but it's as much in the colours of the Costa Rican airline LAXA, which was one of the airlines that was merged into TACA before TACA was taken over by Avianca. So it's kind of a retro scheme, even though it's got huge Avianca tiles. It's got a LAXA tail on it, and that's quite nice. It looks quite attractive. I wasn't even aware this scheme existed until these releases came out, but it is a nice scheme. The reg of the aircraft is N821AV, and it looks really nice. And nobody else yet has announced this model, and because it's in that Central American area that Phoenix never touches, and even JC doesn't touch very often, and Gemini doesn't touch, then there's a good chance I don't think anyone else will actually produce this model. Though I guess it could be a Panda release at some point, maybe through El Aviador or someone. But at the moment, nobody has. So again, it is a unique release, which I like to see, and it does look like it should be super good. So again, I think this one deserves to be up there in the higher flyer land not high fly, sorry, in the supersonic land. I think that, you know, models like this and the Aegean, even though they're not my collection criteria fitting, they are models that illustrate the sort of things that should be being made, models that haven't been made by other brands, and, you know, add to the diversity in the scale. So I think that they're good choices. Whereas I can understand why they're making that Royal Air Force A321 and another Air New Zealand and these JetBlues, but there's less need for them, I think, in terms of looking at the scale. Okay, we've still got 4 more Airbuses to look at, and there aren't any A350s this month, so we've got 3 more baby buses and only 1 A330 left. The next model is an A318. It's a Tarom again, and that aircraft is in essence exactly the same as the Tarom A318, which I think only came out last month, or maybe the month before. It's registered YRASA. The difference, I think, is that it's got a Romania 2019.eu sticker on it, but it's very small to the extent that you probably won't even notice it. So this model is basically re-released with a tiny difference, so just straight to workhorse. However, the next 2, which are both A319s, are a lot more interesting, and again represent core baby bus airliners which haven't been made well or regularly. So I think that these will look really good. They are both in the colours of Air India, though one is wearing a special scheme with Mahatma Gandhi on the tail, or at least kind of like a little figure of Mahatma Gandhi. It's not like a face, but he's taking up the red portion of the tail, and he's standing there in a, you can tell he's got his glasses and he's got his stick. I mean, it's almost you know, a figurine of him as opposed to a replica or a portrait. So yeah, there haven't been many Air India releases. There's only been seemingly 1 Air India A319 previously, and that's from Aero Classics. And it's, you know, relatively obscure. It was made in 2021. Yeah, I think that these are going to be in high demand, and, you know, are again, like the Aegean and the Avianca, will both, you know, add to the diversity of the scale because they're not made before, and there's certainly a lot of merit in these releases. So I'm going to put the standard scheme up in supersonic again, because, you know, I think standard schemes typically have more value, and I'm going to put the Gandhi version, which I actually quite like. It's quite cool. I'm going to put that into high flyer. And that just leaves us the 1 Airbus A330 to round out our Airbus chit chat, and that is in the colours of Air Greenland. And it's interesting because Air Greenland has just been released by JC and Phoenix, but that was obviously the A330-800, whereas this is the A330-200 OY-GRN, which has previously been made by both Phoenix and Aero Classics. They made it in 2013, so that was actually a long time ago that it was made by them. But at the same time, they both did a really good job. So I'm not sure there's that much of a market for Air Greenland, a third Air Greenland A330-200, when the other 2 are around. Yeah, they're not necessarily for sale in shops, but I wouldn't have thought it would be that hard to find one if you did want one. They were both pretty popular at the time, and they both turned out really well. As I said, I'm sure this one will turn out really well too, but it is essentially a re-release of a scheme that's been made twice before and made well twice before. So, you know, it's calling out workhorse to me. Okay, cool. So that gets us through a decent number of the releases, but less than half of them. And so let's move on to the Boeings. Okay, so we're back to the Boeings, and as you'd expect, we've got a selection of 737s this month. And the first one up is a Series 600 in the colours of Malev, which may well be familiar because, lo and behold, they just released one of those. But from what I hear, the previous release, which was HALON, didn't actually seem to get a full release. And I've heard from a couple of retailers that they didn't get their full allocation. So I guess in that sense, it's not surprising that there is a second release, and this one is HALOD. As far as I can tell, it's exactly the same as the previous release, just the reg is changed. So yeah, if you missed out on the first one for whatever reason, then there is at least a second version available. But that's not going to stop me from putting it into Workhorse, because it is just a repeat of the previous release. And I'm not sure how many people would have missed out, or I haven't really checked around, to be honest, the availability of it anyway. Into the 73Gs, and we've got yet another Southwest Airlines release. And as I think I said last month, NG really do like Southwest, and they've made a substantial number of Southwest 737s. And this month's one is wearing the current Heart scheme, but it is a special livery version. The registration is N7816B, and the aircraft is wearing a scheme which I believe relates to the film Coco, which was quite a fun Pixar movie. And yeah, it's colourful. It looks like a nice scheme, actually. What is interesting when you look through the Southwest 73s that have been made by NG is they actually haven't made the standard current scheme, this scheme, which I think is called the Heart scheme. But it has been made multiple times by Panda models with different winglet combos. So presumably at some point NG will make this standard scheme, which has been made by both Gemini and Aero Classics before, though not especially well, admittedly. But this release is, as I say, wearing this special colour scheme, which looks nice but is a little niche, I guess, and one for those who collect Southwest, of which I imagine there is a substantial number. So I would expect it to be pretty popular, but at the same time, even though the scheme is quite nice, I'm going to put this one up into High Flyer. I think it looks good. It looks like a nice livery, but yeah, how many Southwest schemes do you need? Not that many. But then again, I don't collect Southwest. So we've got two more 73Gs, which are simultaneously more interesting to me, but also less interesting for every other person in the West, I imagine. These are both in the colours of China Southern. Yeah, there have only been 9, including these two. There have only been 9 737-700s made for China Southern, and to be honest, none of them are great. 2 are from Phoenix. They're both pretty dire. A couple are using the Winnie mould, and they're both old, and the mould isn't great either. And then there are 3 Aero Classics versions, all with winglets, one's not got winglets, but the other 2 do, which I've actually I own 2 of, and they're not bad. They're using the Panda mould, the older Panda mould, not the current Panda mould. It's okay. It's not spectacular, but it's not bad either. Obviously, they don't have aerials, and they've got this Aero Classics dog here because this was before. This is, I think, 2016 these were released, something like that. So they're quite old. 2014, even older than I thought. So there's no doubt that these 2 from NG will be much better. They actually are both wearing, I hate to say special schemes because they're not really special schemes. One's got the 4077 logo on, exactly the same release that Aero Classics made. And one has an Ordinary Hero logo, which I can't even barely see on the actual aircraft. I'm sure no one really cares anyway. Basically, they both look like they've got small amounts of text, which theoretically made them special schemes, but you wouldn't really notice if you weren't really paying super close attention. So, yeah, they're both not bad, and I am tempted to get at least one of them. They all look really good, I'm sure, where on the excellent NG mould, but I would expect that most people are not remotely interested in these. I'm going to put the one that's got the 4000th 737 logo, I'll put that one to High Flyer, and I'm going to just move that on the Workhorse, mainly because, yeah, I know that people don't really care about China Southern. Okay, cool. So the remaining 737s, of which there are 4, are all Maxes. So as you'd expect, NG are getting their Max molds into play. And the first one is another Southwest Airlines version. Last month we had the first Max, which was in the desert gold retro, and they did kind of muck up the colours on that, but that's not too surprising. This time around it's the canyon blue retro. Shouldn't be any problem getting the colours right on this one. The aircraft is N872CB, and yeah, I really like the mould, I have to say, even though they didn't get the colours particularly correct on that first release. This one I'm sure they will, and the mould did impress me. They fixed the nose gear problem that their samples had, and I think it will look excellent. And I don't think anybody else has made this Max either, so it's a nice unique scheme. So straight up into supersonic, I'm sure it's going to be super welcome. Likewise with their next Maxes as well, which are from the new Australian low-cost carrier Bonza. I think the aircraft are called something so Australian, like Shazza and Gaza, or Shazza and Bazza, or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But basically these two releases are the same, except one of them has got the Bonza logo on the winglets, and I think the other one may not. And a nice touch, NG have responded to collectors who pointed out that they had the wrong winglets on originally and that they didn't have the aircraft names on, and they've made those changes to the artwork so they will have the right details. The aircraft are registered VHUIK and VHUJT. Yeah, this again, if you're going to make molds that everyone has already, then at least when you get them, use them for aircraft that haven't been made by others. And I have to say that it's a good start from NG with their Maxes, and Bonza. I think this is going to be super popular for Aussie collectors. It's such a fun name. And yeah, I'm going to put one of these into supersonic, and I'll put the other one in to high flyer. It's a good choice. I'm sure somebody else is going to make a Bonza Max, but NG got there first, and arguably they've got the best mould. Now their fourth Max is their first Max 9 release. The aircraft is in the colours of United Airlines. It's wearing unicorn colours. And it's registered N37508. Obviously, this scheme has been made previously. It's been made by both Aero Classics and Gemini. In fact, Aero Classics made it twice, though obviously their Max 9 mould isn't great. The Gemini mould, however, is great, and that was made in 2018, and the model looked really nice. So it's not the first time that somebody has made this, but at the same time, it's 4 years since they have made it. It's a really core model for most collectors, I think, in the US, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's a reasonably high demand for a re-release of it. And I think that it'll turn out really nicely because, again, like I've just been waxing lyrical, the NG Max is super nice. So I'm going to slip this one up into high flyer as well. And that ends the 737s for this month. So what else have we got? Well, we've still got a decent chunk of releases to go through, despite the fact I've been on this video for quite some time. We've still got probably about a third of the releases left. And those include a selection of Boeing wide bodies, but they also include more interesting fare. And the first of that more interesting fare is a 757, the only 757 this month, but at least it isn't some modern cargo airline. It is, however, not enormously classic either, I have to admit. It is Cebu Pacific from the Philippines. It is registered RPC2714, and it's wearing this really cool scheme, which Cebu Pacific, for a while, Cebu Pacific, before they standardised on their current attractive but fairly ordinary livery, they had this collection of really exciting special schemes going, and this one is a kind of like scenes of the Philippines, and the aircraft is called City of Manila after the capital, and yeah, it looks really cool. So you've got on the fuselage, you've got palm trees and buildings and a boat, you've got a horse and carriage, you've got some old buildings. It looks really awesome. Obviously 75 looks really cool anyway. Yeah, what more can I say? We don't get enough 757s anymore because we've got too many A321s turning up. But they're still producing some really nice 75s when the opportunity arises. This is a model which I shouldn't be buying. It's outside of my collection criteria by a country mile. but it looks really nice, and I'm super tempted to get it anyway because it is such an interesting scheme, and I'm sure it'll turn out well. For me, this is supersonic all day long, even though it's outside my criteria. Nobody else has made a Cebu Pacific 757 previously. There has been a decent number of Cebu releases in recent times, mainly from Gemini and Phoenix and such, but they've all been in their new scheme. They made the A330 Neo, they've made some Airbus narrow bodies, but nobody's made a 757 up to this point in time. So this will go really well. So supersonic for that Cebu. And I can't talk that much about all the other models because otherwise this video is going to go on forever. Unfortunately, I don't have to because the next run of models are a bit naff. So the next up, we're into the 777s. I've been singularly unimpressed by NG's 777 releases to date. They've been boring, and it continues really this month. The mold isn't still the greatest anyway, as has been pointed out by quite a few people, including myself. The jcwings 777s are superior, and the aviation 400 777-300s are also superior. So I don't really rate the NG mold that highly anyway. But when you're just going to end up releasing another all Nippon Demon Slayer release months after it's been announced by Phoenix and jcwings. In fact, when you look at it, Phoenix they've got one the same reg out. jcwings got this reg as well on back order, admittedly. Probably who knows when it'll turn up. Yeah, what can you say? I talked about the scheme multiple times. I'm not talking about it anymore. It's boring me. It's being made by others. It's going to be made better by others, and you know it's not often they get said about NG, but I am, and I'm just going to put this in gas guzzler because it's just not interesting. They could be doing more interesting things with these 777 models than they are. This is tedious. And the next model after this one is another 777. This one's a 300. It's in the colours of Garuda Indonesia. I think I've said last month, there's going to be more Garuda 777s because they've already made ones beforehand. And this one's fundamentally, I think it's the third one they've made, and it's fundamentally the same as the first one, except it's got Visit Indonesia logo on the lower fuselage, forward of the wing. PK, GIE, yeah. Sometimes NG take it to this nth degree, producing these extra livery versions, which aren't even livery versions. There's like tiny detail changes, and it's getting a little annoying at times. I have to say that I don't see the reason to produce this model particularly, and this is the 17th Garuda 777 that's been made. Again, I'm going to put this in a gas guzzler. It's just not doing it for me at all, which obviously doesn't bode well for the next three models, which are all Qatar Airways, and I am sick of talking about Qatar Airways. And I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing me moan about Qatar Airways and the livery and the World Cup and so on. This month we've got a couple of 7878s wasting their new mold on pointless models. And Phoenix just released one anyway previously, so that's also a bit pointless too. We've also got a 7879 again with the World Cup logo. I don't care. These are boring. They shouldn't be made. Anyone collecting these is... I was going to say something bad, but they're annoying me. Stop buying Qatar Airways, people. They're just not interesting, and there are way too many. It's the 14th. The last of these will be the 14th Qatar Airways 787. All wearing effectively the same scheme. All going in gas guzzler. Be gone. Banished. So that leaves two more 787s on the list. And we're finally getting towards the end of this monster month of releases. And I've calmed down after that Qatar Airways rant. So next up is an EVA Airways 7879 B17885. The scheme is quite nice. It's not the EVA standard scheme. It's the special 787 scheme. It is actually quite attractive. But when I look back over the list of EVA 787s, the other 12 of them that have been made, then I can see this has been made by jcwings. It's been made by Phoenix. Twice by Phoenix, in fact. And it's been made by NG. So, though not the same reg, obviously. So, why are they re-releasing this one again? I don't know why. I know it was one of their earlier releases when they made the first one. It was back in 2018, so it must have been one of the earliest 787s. But it still looks really good, the old release. I just don't see the point in re-releasing this. Unnecessary, pointless, and Workhorse. It's better than the previous choices, but it's still not exciting. And we finish off the Dreamliners with the Thai Airways 787-8 HSTQE. This one at least is a sensible choice, because even though there have been 5 previous Thai 787s, 4 of them have been made on the mediocre Phoenix mold, and 1 has been made by Gemini, which looks a little bit weird and is on the seamed mold as well, and that was made in 2014. I think all of the old ones are quite old. And 2017 was the last Phoenix one. Still, it's 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So I think my point still stands. I don't mind re-releases when they significantly improve on the previous release, which this one will. It will be significantly better than the old Gemini and Phoenix versions. So I think this one actually is, of the 777 and 787 this month, the only one which is really got a reason to exist, and I would say this one therefore powers up into high flyer. But you know, I've got to say that I feel there's going to be a stream of 787-8s that re-release previous models in the future. Hopefully most of them will fit in this kind of category, and most of them will not be like that Qatar Airways. So less 787s and less 777s I think would do NG good at this point in time, especially if they're going to be detail releases. So we're out of the Boeings finally, and there's just 2 more models to discuss. Obviously, if you're not talking Airbus and you're not talking Boeing, then you must be talking something at least vaguely interesting. And the first one of these models is a Cathay Pacific TriStar. But not the Cathay Pacific TriStar that they actually announced before Christmas as a future release. It's another one. So I don't know why they wasted the time announcing the previous release if they're not going to actually put it out soon. This one is VRHHK. It's in delivery colours. It's got the silver belly. It's got a little black nose cone. It looks really nice. It's got the Super TriStar tail titles. Yeah, what more can I say? This is going to be probably the release of the month, because most of the time their TriStars are the releases of the month. This one will be really nice, and if they carry on as they have with all these Qatari Dreamliners and 777s and JetBlue A321s and Air New Zealand A321s and so on and so forth, then surely they will be releasing 3 or 4 Cathay TriStars, because there's lots of different variations of the Squires logo, or the titles on the tail, or the nose cone, or the British flag on the tail, and that kind of thing. So you'd expect there to be a few versions of Cathay TriStars. Obviously we've got this one, and we've got the second one. There's equally room for at least 2 or 3 more, I think. But it's clearly supersonic, so it's going to be a really, really good model. And that leaves us just one more model to discuss. It is a Tu-154. 1 a month seems to be all we're ever going to get. But this one is not an M. This one is on the B mold. And that introduces some interesting questions, because have they fixed the mold? I'm not sure. I've not heard anything about the mold being fixed. It needed the wing modified to match the wing of a Tu-154B, and I think, as I recall, there were some other issues with the engine in the tail and things like that. Either way, it wasn't quite correct, so it'll be interesting to see whether they have resolved those issues. Check out my detailed review of the samples on the website if you want to read more about that. This aircraft is in the colours of the Russian Air Force, so that immediately makes it less interesting than it ought to be. Somehow NG has scoured Tu-154s and found probably the only B version which is still flying. It's registered RA855, and it's part of the 223rd flight unit, apparently. Because it's not an airline, it immediately makes it a lot less interesting, and there's obviously a whole sea of Tu-154Bs they could be producing. So I'm disappointed by the source material, but I'm tempted to get it because, hey, it's Tu-154. I'm also tempted to get it to see what they've done with the mold as well and give it a review. So yeah, I'll see whether I do or not. But it's not supersonic because the livery choice is, yeah, it just disappoints me when NG do this. This is exactly what they were doing with their Tu-204s, that They create an airliner whose heyday was in the past, and then they spend the time producing releases that frankly don't represent the vast majority of the aircraft's career. And so we get this B-type T-154 in the colours of the Russian Air Force, which I shouldn't think anyone's even that particularly interested in getting. It's not the sort of livery I'd have thought that people are going to be crying out for, when they could have produced some of the Aeroflot schemes, or they could have produced most of the Eastern Bloc carriers, which I would have thought would be more popular. And obviously there's a whole range of Russian airlines as well they could make using this. So somewhat disappointing, but forgivable, because at least there is a 154 this month. But I'm going to put this one into high flyer for the reasons I've talked about, and I may well get it. So that rounds up all of the releases for this month. Finally, it is a lot of releases, and I do think maybe even NG are perhaps getting to the point where they're releasing too many models in a month for their own good. But when you do look through the list of models, obviously it's not really 33, because they're not 33 distinct, completely different models. You've got the Airbusans and the Bonza, Air India, the Air Transats, the JetBlues, which are just versions of themselves. So it's not like a complete new piece of design work. You've got, the same with the Qatar Dreamliners. So it's not really 33 models, but there is that extra effort involved. But you could equally argue here that they've got some models which there's no real reason to make. The Tarom A318 and the Malev 737-600 kind of stand out as models which aren't really needed, I would say, because they are fundamentally the same as previous releases. This is the same about the EVA F787 as well. So, yeah, they could definitely be cutting some of these as models that nobody would miss and probably never asked for. But at the same time, there's still some really good material in here, and I thought with such a wide range of models that there's something for everyone somewhere. For me, obviously, I'm focusing on the more classic aircraft, the Corsair SP, the Cebu Pacific 75, the Cathay TriStar, and that T-154 are probably the four that really stand out for me. Though I have to say that if I was at a push and I was short of money, the only one which I really would need to get would be the Cathay TriStar, and the other three are kind of nice to haves. So that's a little disappointing when you've got a list of 33 models, and even someone like me is looking through and going, actually only one of these I really need. But I'm sure for other people that won't be the case, and the releases like the Bonza and the Air New Zealand, those Air India A319s, they should be really popular, and the Southwest Max and things like that. So you've got to say that there's something for everyone, surely, and long may it continue. I hope NG can sustain this kind of delivery over the long term. But if you can't, NG, please scale it back slightly just to make sure that you survive, because we do not want you going out of business. You're producing the best models in the scale. Anyway, that's it for this month, guys. When there's such a large number of models, it's difficult for me to talk in detail about the molds and things, so I apologise if I've skipped through this quite quickly. But at the same time, yeah, it is what it is. Otherwise, you'd be here for hours. I'll see you next time at yesterday's Airlines, and keep an eye out for more snapshot videos. But that's it for now.